I was trapped in a London Underground station for 15 years. I was a girl when it happened. Well, 20 years old. That version of myself certainly seems like a girl now. That bright-eyed second-year university student taking the tube to a biology lecture. It's important to stress that I did nothing to land myself in the nightmare which followed. I wasn't ever anything extraordinary. I don't know why it happened to me. Why does anything bad ever happen to anyone? Like every other early morning commuter in that underground station, I let the escalator carry me up to the lobby above ground. I dozily eyed the inclining row of posters to my left, advertising whatever was current back in 2010. I remember being tired, and likely hungover, so I thought little of the feathery lightness in my skull as the mechanical step took me towards the top of the staircase. Suddenly, a white blanket started to encase the world, obscuring my vision, and then my eyesight cleared to reveal that I was standing not in the station's above-ground lobby, but at the bottom of the moving staircase. Supporting myself on the escalator's balustrade, I leapt onto a step and tried again. My initial assumption was that I'd simply had far more to drink than I previously thought. However, once again, I failed to exit the underground station. That white light swallowed my vision, returning me to the bottom of the moving staircase again and again and again. Horror rapidly set into my bones, as much as I tried to fight against it. After failing 5 or 6 times to exit up the escalator, I instead rushed back onto the platform and tried to board a train. But the same thing happened. That white light stole my sight and thrust me a few feet back from the platform's edge, which somehow drew absolutely no looks of interest from boarding or deboarding passengers. And believe me when I say that I tried to draw people's attention. I turned frantically to passers-by, hoping they would share my confusion and existential panic, but they didn't. I was invisible to all, despite my best efforts. When I pleaded for help, commuters either ignored me or treated me like a leper. Such is the way of any major city, I suppose, but this was more than that. It was as if I were being kept from the outer world, not just physically, but mentally. Something had caught me in a bubble, binding me to that London Underground station. Just know that I have tried, 1,000 different times, in 1,000 different ways, to escape. On that very first day, a few friendly souls tried to assist. The first kind stranger came along after I'd spent half an hour relentlessly stepping onto that escalator, only to find myself returning continually to the bottom.
"Are you okay, miss?"
asked the little old lady. I blubbered loudly, slouching against the wall near the bottom of the stairs to regain my wind. I physically can't leave the station."
"What on earth do you mean, dear?"
the woman replied, placing a tender hand on my shoulder. I sniffled, wiping tears from my cheeks, then nodded at the top of the escalator. Let me show you." I stepped onto the moving staircase once again, and at the top, the white light enveloped me, then I found myself back at the bottom. Yet, the most disquieting thing happened. I turned towards that little old lady, threw my hands up exasperatedly, and found myself staring into her vacant eyes. The elderly woman looked at me, as if for the first time.
"Gosh, dear," she said. You're crying. Are you okay?"
What?" I whispered. We were just talking. Didn't you see me try to... What did you see?" The doddery pensioner's frown morphed into a timid, doe-eyed look.
I'm sorry, but I don't understand, sweetheart.
Did I just appear out of thin air?
I screamed. My high-pitched squeal startled the poor woman. She jolted on the spot and clamped a hand to her chest.
Heavens, darling, I'm only trying to help you. When I saw you walking down the escalator, face strewn with tears...
What? I interrupted breathlessly.
You saw me walking down the escalator.
The woman gulped.
Yes, love. You looked a million miles away. Is there somebody I need to call? I mean this in the kindest way possible. You don't seem to be in a balanced state of mind.
Please, get me out of here, I croaked, heart starting to feel as weighty as my head.
Right. I'll go and fetch help,
promised the woman, who scurried fearfully past me onto the escalator. I never saw her again. About 10 minutes later, I took my trusty Samsung Ultra Touch out of my pocket. He was my dearest friend for many years in that solitary cell. Sammy, I called him. Anyhow, I started by calling and texting every single person on my contact list, which was when the true horror started to wriggle its way into my flesh. My friends and relatives were all alarmed by my situation. Each of them promised to help, and each of them failed to help. People would read my texts or answer my calls, but I'd hear nothing back from them. And when I'd ask for updates on the cavalry arriving to save me from that underground station, I'd get responses such as, "Oh, I don't remember seeing this message. Sorry."
What? When did you send this? You need help with... what?
Every single person forgot about me, and they all continued forgetting about me, no matter how many times I contacted them for help. And I realised that it must have been the same case with the little old woman. People were forgetting me, and I was supposedly forgetting moving my very feet back down the escalator. It all sounds impossible, doesn't it? Even to me, after so many years, it still feels like a horrible, horrible dream. And like every bad dream, it comes with a monster. That very first day of imprisonment passed in a horrid blur. This was, unbeknownst to me, only one day out of thousands to come.
There's one thing that Transport for London doesn't abide, and it's homeless people,
I thought facetiously, pressing my spine into the curvature of the corridor's tiled wall.
A member of staff will phone the police once I've been caught sleeping rough down here. Then somebody will come to rescue me, or arrest me, same thing.
Nobody came. I felt foolish for having hoped somebody would. After all, that place was muddying people's minds. I am absolutely certain that an underground employee must have seen me on a CCTV camera, but that mysterious force will have wiped the security guard's memory. I envisioned a worker reaching for the phone, fully intending to rat me out to the police, only to absent-mindedly get out of their chair and fetch a bourbon from the biscuit tin instead. I sobbed as the nature of my paranormal prison, far below the ground, dawned on me. I was trapped, and nobody saw me. No person saw me, I should say. Around 3 a.m, as my eyelids drifted together, there came the sharp smacks of something striking the distant floor of a distant hallway. Somewhere deep within the station. It sounded like sodden feet, fresh out of a bathtub, slapping against glazed ceramic tiles. I dismissed it as a dream, of course. Besides, I was already focusing on my migraine, which seemed to have been induced by the pounding of something akin to a tiny mallet behind my retinas. When I opened my eyes to find myself sitting against a wall near the escalators, sunlight pouring from the lobby above, I screamed. Worst of all, I screamed right in the face of a kind young rail service worker, looking at me, who was eyeing me uncertainly. I remember thinking that he looked quite sweet, with his warm smile and overgrown brown locks. That distracted me, if only for a moment, from the terror of what I'd endured the day before. It all quickly came back to me, of course. "I'm afraid you're not allowed to nap in the station," the blue-shirted worker said. "I know you've probably not been here long, but—" "I've been here all night," I interjected with a quivering voice. I was half telling myself, as I struggled to believe that I'd actually spent the night at a train station. The young man, possibly only a few years older than me, smiled. "As I said, I don't think you've been sleeping here for that long, miss. You're probably just a little disoriented. It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. If you'd been here all night, somebody would have moved you along." I didn't reply. Instead, I turned to look at that awful escalator, which had haunted me the day before. The worker nodded slowly, as if understanding a thing about my situation, and a pitying frown, much like the one worn by the old lady, started to spread across his face. "You look hungry. Would you like a bite to eat?" I didn't want a bite to eat. I wanted to get out of that hellish place. But this was the first person who'd properly seen me since I first found myself trapped down there. And it had been a long, long 24 hours. I was tired. I was hungry. I was frightened. For all of those reasons, I obliged and followed the young staff member to his office down a nearby corridor. As he entered the 4-digit code beside the door, I logged it in my mind. I had a feeling that this room might become essential to my survival, and I wasn't wrong. The worker sat me on a swivel chair, then fetched a cheese sandwich and some grapes from the fridge. A blessed sight after a grueling day without food. I practically inhaled the grub, whilst the man sat on a second swivel chair opposite me.
"I'm not homeless,"
I insisted between mouthfuls, nodding at the bag by my feet.
"Look inside. I'm a student at King's College."
I kicked the yellow rucksack over, and the worker unzipped it. "Oh, right," he said, eyeing one of my biology books. You're telling the truth. Sorry, Were you just skipping a class to catch up on some rest? My sister goes to uni and she never gets enough sleep." I shook my head. "I'm trapped." The man raised an eyebrow. "Trapped?" I nodded. "I know you won't believe me, but every time I try to leave this station, I end up right back down here. It started yesterday. Whenever I reach the top of the escalator or the inside of a train, a white light blinds me, and I find myself back in the station." The underground employee seemed concerned by my admission. Unlike anyone else, however, this man, this stranger, didn't treat me like a madwoman. And that felt like the first dose of something resembling normality in the past 24 hours. "That sounds dreadful," the worker replied. "I hope you don't mind me asking this. Are you prone to seizures, miss?" "I might have believed so," I said. "But, well, that doesn't explain the rest of it." "The rest of it?" he asked. "The scariest thing about all of this is the way people are treating me," I explained.
Strangers, relatives, friends, it doesn't matter. They all promise to help me, but then they forget that we even had a conversation.
Well, that's just simply not true, the man said, standing up and extending a hand. Come on, I'll lead you out of the station right now. We'll walk up the escalator together, then we'll book you a taxi to the hospital, okay? I'm no doctor, but it really sounds like you've bumped your head or something.
No, I said. You'll forget that we had this conversation. My own mother keeps forgetting about my situation, no matter how many times I explain it to her. And with strangers it's worse. They forget that I exist.
Let's not be strangers then. I'm Peter, he said. What's your name?
Carla, I answered.
Peter smiled. Lovely to meet you, Carla. Right, here's another idea. Stay here until the end of my shift. I'll keep popping my head in and out to check on you. Raid the fridge whilst I'm gone. You must be starving. And charge your phone. But at the end of my shift, we need to make a plan. Because you're not allowed to stay down here. Understand? And if I see any sign of anything resembling a medical emergency, then I will...
I'm fine. I'm not having seizures, I insisted.
Peter frowned. I really should just call someone, shouldn't I?
If you try, you'll forget all of this, I promised.
I don't believe that, he said.
But he did.
He must have done. Otherwise, as he said, he would have called someone. He wouldn't have just let me spend the next 8 hours in that room. I spent Peter's shift attempting, much like the day before, to get help from family members and friends. But the nightmare repeated, looping endlessly. My loved ones were worried. They hadn't forgotten that I existed. But their minds were muddled, befuddled. They were part of whatever had cursed me. Something, whatever was keeping me in that underground station, seemed to be ensuring that I would receive no outside help. Worst of all, come 11 in the night, Peter did not appear in the office's doorway. Rather, I was greeted by a perplexed woman in the same blue uniform.
Who the bleeding heck are you?
She asked rather placidly. I realised that I'd been fortunate over the past day not to come face to face with any rough, tough employees.
Get out before I call the police.
I wanted to explain myself, but I was young, so I panicked. After collecting my phone, charger and bag, I scurried out of the office, then ran through a near-deserted corridor towards the escalators. I nearly tried to escape once more, but I thought of Peter and his promise to save me, so I decided to look for him. The one person who had truly seen and heard me. However, when I searched the emptying tunnels of the station, weaving through the last commuters of the day, there was no sign of him. He forgot me after all, I dejectedly thought, returning to my somewhat safe place by the escalators, the only spot in my cage from which I could see a glimpse of the night sky. I sat against the wall, hoping that the woman on duty would call the police, but no one ever came. The white light at the top of the escalator didn't need to erase me from people's minds. They seemed perfectly capable of forgetting me on their own. And that, I was well aware, had something to do with the force orchestrating my imprisonment. I thought about all of this as I drifted off to sleep again. The headache behind my eyes returned, though there came no haunting smacks against tiles on that second night. I never saw Peter on duty again, and from that third day onwards, I found that my humanity flitted away rather hurriedly, much like time itself. I focused only on my survival. For weeks, and then months, I survived as a panhandler, subsisting by begging for whatever strangers would give. Utilising the door code I'd seen Peter input, I'd occasionally sneak into the office too. I always waited for the on-duty employee to leave, of course. Then I'd steal food from the fridge and charge my phone. I knew full well that, even if a member of staff were to catch me, my existence would quickly be erased from his or her memory. Even I had forgotten that I existed. I was no longer Carla. I meant as little to the world above as the rats scurrying through the tunnels, surviving on whatever scraps they found. That being said, I still tried to escape in various ways. Once, I attempted to burrow through the station wall. As I picked away at a brick with a kitchen knife, railway workers and commuters attempted to stop me. But I would wait for them to forget about my existence, then I would continue. After months of work, I had successfully removed quite a few bricks, and I poked my head through the opening late at night. However, the white light spat me back out, killing that dream of escape. From time to time, there also came the sounds of smacking against tiles. Distant, but never really that distant at all. It continued that way for years, until a visual joined the noise. One night, around the Christmas of 2013, I saw something which almost made me scream. Fortunately, my paralysed vocal cords stopped me. A shadow, like a rising and falling wave, painted the white tiled walls of a corridor perpendicular to mine. My eyes ached from my nightly migraine, but I knew that they were telling me no lies, and neither were my ears. I wanted to run, but my mind and body somehow drifted off to sleep. As I fell into that dark slumber, I shrieked internally, imagining that I would never wake up again. I was certain that the source of the shadow would find me whilst I rested, and my torturous existence will finally come to an end, I bleakly thought with a hint of relief. When I woke on the floor of the station, I was both relieved and disappointed in equal measure. After 3 years, time had become a fuzzy concept to me. I'd made it that way. Otherwise, I would have succumbed to total psychological ruin, driven mad by isolation in that dungeon of cream-coloured tiles and fluorescent lights. Essentially, I still wanted to survive, and dissociating was the only way to do that. However, Christmas was always a temporal marker that I struggled to ignore, a reminder of the years passing by. And when I saw that festive tree go up for the 5th time, I felt my 25-year-old heart strain. I'd been forgotten by the world above. It was more terrible than that. My friends and family remembered me, yet they'd done nothing to save me in 5 years. That wasn't their fault, but that pain forever lingers. During that Christmas of 2015, I was possessed by a strange idea. As the nightly migraine swam through the crevices of my grey matter, I thought of that shadow I'd seen 2 years earlier. I thought of how much tighter my eyeballs had felt, tighter than ever before. The rhythm of that pounding headache had been loud enough to fill my ear canals. However, it had dulled slightly when I closed my eyes. So I wondered whether sight might be causing the headaches. The sight of that shadowy thing. Maybe, even when I didn't realise it, I'd been seeing the skulker at the edge of my vision. I climbed to my feet and made my way to the station's platform. Then I eyed the black mouth of the tunnel to the left. Over the past 5 years, I had heard that black passageway spit occasional smacks and splatters, similar to those awful sounds I'd first heard years earlier. Something prowled the halls of the station at night, and I feared that it might live in the tunnel. I'd tried to escape along the tracks before, many months earlier. The white light had, of course, taken me. Unlike my other escape attempts, the experience came with a skull-splitting headache. It had been an agony that put all of my other migraines to shame. Something was special about that tunnel. I clambered down from the platform onto the railway tracks, knowing that the night guard in the office would likely have seen me on her security feed. Of course, I also knew that she would have already forgotten about me. This was the blessing and the curse of the underground station's spell. Once I was standing on the tracks, facing the black void of the tunnel, I blindfolded myself with my old filthy scarf. Then, with a deep breath, I walked forwards, guided only by sound. "30 seconds later, I could hear that I'd entered the tunnel. My footsteps had been ricocheting off the large expanse of the station, then the enclosed space had muffled them. I'd made it into the mouth of that passageway. My heartbeat quickened as I pushed onwards. The last time I'd entered the tunnel, without a blindfold, I'd been walloped by that familiarly wretched wall of white. Worse, I'd been torn apart by an ache in my skull. This time, none of that happened. I walked and nothing stopped me. I knew that I had travelled farther from the station than any other time in the past 5 years. 5 minutes later, the reverberating sound of my feet against the metal tracks started to spread far and wide, started to fill a much greater space. "No," I gasped joyously, realising what that meant as I started to undo my scarf blindfold. I uncovered my eyes to find myself standing on the tracks beside the next station. For the first time in half a decade, I had travelled beyond the bounds of my prison. I started to bounce giddily from foot to foot, but my celebratory jig lasted only a moment. My eyes caught something 20 feet away on the otherwise deserted platform. A man. He was facing the wall, wearing the cerulean jacket and light blue undershirt of a typical station worker. His knotty shoulder-length hair was marred with muck and specks of red, but it looked vaguely familiar. He looked vaguely familiar. As I ran towards the edge of the platform, my headache returned, and white crept into the sides of my vision. I felt myself starting to reset. I felt, in fact, something worse. Scalding breath, billowing in puffs of steam against my goosebump-covered nape. The skulking thing was behind me. Just before the world slipped away from sight, the man on the platform raised his hands backwards to part his scraggly hair. Only, those shaggy curtains did not draw to reveal the back of his head. His hair parted to reveal a horridly glum face. The face of Peter, that railway worker who I hadn't seen for 5 years, was facing the wrong way. His neck had been twisted 180 degrees, pointing his morose facial features in the opposite direction to his body below. Undeniably, the blood-soaked man was no longer alive. I wailed as the white finished enveloping my vision. Then I found myself back where I belonged. I was sitting against the wall, in the station which had been my home for 5 years. And all became clear. Even if I could escape beyond the boundaries of my prison, the thing in the tunnel would always pull me back. Perhaps even if I'd been brave enough to permanently blind myself. I lost my will after that. As the years passed, I stooped deeper into the throes of depression and lunacy. I survived by breaking into a night guard's office every day to steal sandwiches, water, and a socket to charge my phone, which became a dusty, half-broken iPhone, as my Samsung was sadly pickpocketed at some point in 2017. I stayed far away from that tunnel, pretending not to see and hear things. That long, wavy shade on the wall, wet, thwacking footsteps against the floor. It was no longer aimlessly prowling the hallways. It was searching for me. Not every night, or perhaps I simply didn't hear it every night. And it was fear that eventually drove me to post about my experience on an online forum, praying that somebody on the internet would be able to help me. Failing that, at least I would have a chance of not being forgotten. I figured that people might remember me once the spell had been broken. Once the creature had placed my mangled, undead corpse beside Peter. "Hey, is your story real?" That was the message I received from a Redditor. And I huffily told him that, yes, my story is real, thank you very much. I didn't understand why anybody would lie about such a thing. Maybe I'd been living in a London Underground station too long, under that proverbial rock. That was certainly what the Redditor implied. He said, "People lie about all kinds of things. Are you new to the internet? Lol. I've been imprisoned in a train station for 15 years, with nothing but a string of smartphones to keep me company. What do you think?" I snarkily replied. "Okay, I'm sorry," he messaged. "In fairness, I was just thinking that you've missed a lot above the surface. The world's quite different now. So you've really been trapped down there since 2010? "Yes, I really have," I replied. "Well then I guess I'd better tell you something that might help you," he said. "I'm not sure whether I'll believe it, this being the internet and all. You know, the home of lies," I quipped moodily. "Okay, I deserve that," he admitted. "Look, take my story or leave it, but your tale is reminiscent of something that happened to me in India, when I worked for Doctors Across Borders. I found myself trapped in a remote village. None of us were able to step more than 10 feet beyond the outer border of the town. And we learnt, much like you, that we weren't alone. I still don't know how to describe what I saw and heard, mostly just a shadow against the walls of buildings. It hid well, only ever attacking at night. I'm not sure where it went during the day. But we came to realise that this thing hunted like a spider. It had caught us in its web, and it planned to devour us. Villagers disappeared one by one, the cattle too. Nearly every living thing was devoured by this creature. Now, here's my hypothesis, and I'll explain it. This creature was never trying to trap you. It was only ever trying to trap Peter. You were unwillingly caught in its web. Who knows how or why? All we know for sure is that the creature clearly doesn't see you, or you would have died along with Peter. That's how you've lived for so long right under its nose. You were never meant to be stuck there. The trap was laid for Peter, and it worked. But this creature must sense you. The unexpected anomaly. That would explain why it still prowls the station's corridors. Why it hasn't moved along. See, a group of the villagers and I survived our encounter in India through sheer luck. We noticed that one creature in that village was spared. We saw it happen as we watched from our hiding spot in a barn. The beast, a long shadow snaking through the streets, consumed some poor fleeing residents, a cow, a cat, and anything else in its way, except for the great Indian bustard. It's a bird prevalent to that region. Anyway, this bustard stood dumbly and blissfully at the side of the street, but the demonic creature slithered straight past it. It completely avoided the bird. Now, we knew that it could have been a fluke, but we were desperate. We had to believe that this beast didn't see the bustard. We had to believe that it could see only the things it wanted to consume. The very next night, we had an idea. We captured a poor bustard, and we laid a trap. We bound the bird with a piece of rope to one of the surviving chickens, and we set the pair in the middle of the street. Then we waited throughout the night. And sure enough, the beast came again. It devoured the chicken, but it also unknowingly devoured the great Indian bustard. And then, in a terrible display of roars and writhing, the beast choked and died. It liquefied into a puddle. So you see my point, don't you? I replied, yes, but I don't have a great Indian bustard with me down here. They're not exactly native to London. Your beast was hunting something else, the stranger replied. Its blind spot seems to be you. Oh, I'm the bustard, I typed shakily, finally catching the stranger's drift. For whatever reason, yes, you just might be, he replied. Well, I'm not going to feed myself to him. That won't save me, will it? I said. No, but think about it. You don't need to offer all of yourself, said the stranger. And that sentence will forever haunt me. I weakly replied, you're saying that I should offer a pound of flesh, or maybe only a pinch of a pound. Is that right? I don't know, Carla. I really don't. But you're running out of options, aren't you? You don't want to live down there forever, he said. And I should add that you were right to cover your eyes, you know? One of the villagers looked directly at that thing for too long. We all saw glimpses of it, but she was hypnotised by it. She survived, but she never was quite right after that. So I should do this blindfolded? I asked. If you value your sanity, he replied. And what did I have to lose? 15 years of solitude. I was ready, one way or another, for all to come to an end. I wanted to survive, of course, but if not, then at least the nightmare would be over. That was my mindset. Using the bladed edge of some scissors I swiped from the office, I began the excruciating work of slicing skin away from my thigh. I'd also swiped a bottle of alcohol, but let me tell you that it did little to help. I studied biology, not medicine. I didn't know what I was doing. But the thigh seemed like a good spot. I ended up taking nowhere near even 1/8 of a pound. But I'm not a bustard. I planned on sacrificing as little of myself as possible to this monster. After all, I had no idea whether the internet stranger's story had any truth to it. I wasn't planning to hack into my body for nothing. When the vile chunk of flesh came away, I quickly covered the wound with a clean bandage, stolen from the office's first aid box. I prayed that my leg wouldn't get infected, and prayed that my offering would be enough to satiate the beast's hunger. Then, feeling a sharp sting in my left leg, I staggered towards the station's tunnel. I had decided, given my hellish encounter a decade earlier, that this black pit at the left-hand side of the platform must be the home of the beast. Had to be the home of the beast. I used an elastic band to bind my removed strip of thigh flesh to a rat. Believe me when I say that it took many hours to ensnare the poor unwitting fella, who was blissfully padding around with his friends. The cruelest part was hobbling his little legs so that he wouldn't be able to escape. Survival is a merciless thing. Wearing my scarf, older and filthier than ever, as a blindfold once more, I walked up to the platform edge, with my poisonous, fleshy, wriggling meal in hand. A rat with a cape of flesh. I dropped onto the tracks below, which were covered in water and sludge from recent flooding. Then I moved into the mouth of the tunnel, and my footsteps grew intimate as I entered the monster's lair. There came not a low growl from the depths of the blackness, but a distant plink. The plink of something stepping in a far-off puddle. I felt the rat squirm disapprovingly in my hand, and I mumbled words of apology as I placed the crippled creature, wearing a strip of my thigh, onto the tracks. Then I started to back away slowly. A series of watery slaps immediately sounded. They were not measured, but fast, awfully fast. Fast yet still inexplicably heavy. This bulky monster was far too nimble for its mass. I knew that even with my eyes covered, so I started to back away more quickly. The creature approached too speedily, however, and I tripped backwards, thumping my spine painfully against the metal tracks below. Lying on the railway line, I expected the thing to pounce upon me, but it found my bait inside the tunnel instead. I eyeballed the blackness, listening to the sounds of squelching as the beast munched on the defenceless creature, as it munched also on that piece of my flesh. It did not take long for a hiss to spill out of that thing's mouth, or some orifice. The sound severed the quiet of that tunnel into two halves, one empty, and one full of that repugnant, spittle-coated breath which had spattered across my skin. And I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I'm grateful that I tore the scarf from my eyes. Though I saw absolutely nothing in the black tunnel surrounding me, I immediately understood something horrifying. The creature, at long last, saw me. As if, by devouring my flesh, that monster had opened its eyes to a wider array of prey. In response, without any conscious input, my body bounced to a standing position, swiveled on a heel, then barreled towards the close glow of the underground station about 30 feet away. But as I ran, migraine starting to come into effect, I heard pursuing clumps. Wet clumps from that unseen creature which had unintentionally entrapped me in its web, or bubble, for 15 terrifying years. Its breath swept through the tunnel, encompassing me. Once I made it to the fluorescent lights of my underground home, I scrambled onto the platform, making a firm effort not to turn back. But peripheral vision is the darndest thing. I saw something direful at the farthest reach of my vision as I dashed towards the tiled hallway ahead. It came from the tunnel's mouth into the light. There was no body, no large hairy beast. 15 years of fantasies involving titanic wolves and felines had all failed me. The truth was a terror beyond human imagination. Since seeing it, I've been telling myself that my eyes must have deceived me. After all, I saw it only in my vision's periphery. There emerged a face. It was a face nearly human, save for the fact that it filled the entire entrance of the tunnel, squishing against the brickwork as it struggled to squeeze out. Pale flesh finally drove through the passageway's half-moon opening, like an ice pop surfacing. However, most of the creature's face, or what my edge vision detected as a face, was filled with ginormous jaws. A wide-open mouth with pearly whites that each matched me in dimensions. A single fang would have been sufficient to obliterate my entire body. The thing's flesh, which seemed to be spewing the hissing sound I had heard, was emitting black plumes of gas, as if the creature were evaporating, possibly from the toxic meal it had consumed. He was right, I thought. I'm a bastard. I saw all of this in the space of what must have been, at most, a half-second. I didn't stop. I ran. My brain whirred in horror as I attempted to process whatever I'd seen. An uncanny face of some human giant, 10 times the size of any mortal man. Maybe. Maybe not. I'll never know, and I never want to know. I rounded the corridor's corner to face the escalator, my mortal enemy for half of my life. I sprinted towards it, tagged by that gargantuan thing whose flesh slapped rapidly against tiles. Then came pain like no other. A blazing pain. It tore across my ankle. Something large had coiled around me, bringing my body tumbling down against the escalator's static steps. And I felt my foot ripping away. Felt muscles, bones, and tendons being chewed inside that monster's powerful maw. Before the being had a chance to move its bite a little higher, however, an almighty sound came. It was neither a bellow nor a whisper, but something in between, like the cry of a very, very old thing. A thing taking its final breath after eons of existence. I didn't want to look, but I had to know that it was over. And when I turned my neck, I found myself staring at something other than the monster. I found myself looking down at the tiles, just past the bottom of the escalator, to see a black, watery puddle spreading across the floor. I shuffled, unable to walk on my bloody stump, towards the button for the escalator. Then I thumped it with my fist. I felt myself fading as the staircase carried my half-alive body up to the top of the station. And as my eyesight faded, I realised something. Not just that it was blackness rather than whiteness which swallowed my vision. No, I realised, most wonderfully of all, that I had achieved something new for the first time in 15 years. I had made it to the top of the escalator. I woke this morning in a hospital bed, surrounded by family and friends who had spent over a decade searching for me. I showed them the messages and calls we'd been exchanging since 2010, but none of them understood. I still hardly understand it either. My loved ones remember it all, yet simultaneously they don't remember a thing. They don't remember how they left me in that underground station to rot. Their heads hurt, probably in the same way that my head used to hurt, whenever they try to think about it. So I've told them to stop. It doesn't matter now. I'm safe. It's over. Thank you, I messaged my internet hero. I'm sorry it took so much from you, Carla, he said, but you made it.